This is episode 22 of Cinescope, and Adrian! Welcome to Cinescope, where our goal is not to criticize or to assign ratings, but rather to celebrate the movies we love, exploring story, characters, music, and relevance to the world around us. I'm your host, Chad Hopkins, and joining me today is Patrick Hicks to talk about one of our favorite films, Rocky. Patrick, how are you doing tonight?
Man, I'm good. It's good to be here. Finally, a chance to hang out and talk about this great film.
Yeah, this is an episode that we've been trying to make for about a month now, and my schedule got crazy, and your schedule got crazy, and you left the country for a week or two, and I left the country for a week or two, and this is... I think it actually works out for the better because the timing of this episode and its release really sort of fits in with the content of the movie. So
absolutely. When you mentioned when this episode was going to drop in context to the movie we're actually talking about, I'm going, this is perfection. This was what was supposed to happen.
Right. It was meant to be. So how about you tell us about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So, like I said, my name is Patrick Hicks, but I go by Patch. Most of my friends call me Patch. And I co-host a podcast called Feel and Film with my buddy Aaron. And it's primarily designed to, it's essentially a podcast that we talk about movies and we talk about the emotional takeaway that we get from it, focusing less on the technical stuff and more on just kind of what people go to movies for, and that's to be entertained. And we've been doing that since about April. It got kicked off with the Batman v Superman controversy and all of its love-hate that it received.
I just got that movie on Blu-ray, the Ultimate Edition, for Christmas, and I have not watched it, so I'm looking forward for that being my first experience.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on it, because it's definitely a divisive, or at least a conversation starter. So we've been doing that since April, and outside of that, I am an e-learning developer. I'm a designer. I try to make courseware great again, because in the world that I live in, particularly with the military, who are our primary clients, courseware can be pretty boring. And so I'm trying to help kind of remedy that by crafting creative stories within e-learning environments for students in the military field.
Very cool. And you mentioned you are from the Feel and Film podcast. And of course, we had Aaron on to talk about Blade Runner way back in like episode 5, I think. And I've been on your show once to talk with Aaron again about Doctor Strange. And so now it's great to finally be having a conversation with you about a movie.
Yes. When you asked me to be on, I was ecstatic. I was like, I was waiting for him to call. It's like I was like that high school girl that was waiting for that boy to call her and say, hey. So I'm really excited to be on.
Yes, our podcast's approach to film criticism is sort of similar. In fact, when I first sort of came up with the idea of Cinescope, and I was talking to another friend, Mikey Fissel, about the idea, he said, it's a great idea, Chad, but it sort of sounds similar to this other podcast that my friends are running. And so I talked with Aaron then, and we worked it out, and it was like, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with more positivity in the world, so go for it. And so
that's exactly right.
Yeah, I'm glad to be talking with somebody else who has the same sort of mindset of celebrating movies rather than just tearing them down.
For sure. I mean, we go to movies because we want to enjoy them. I mean, I don't know a lot of people that go to movies expecting it to be kind of crappy. So
not at all.
Why not? Why not embrace what people go to movies for? It's definitely not to expend like $40 on popcorn.
Right. Well, real quick, before we dive into the movie, I laid off the review, subscribe spiel for a couple weeks for the holiday season, but now it's almost a new year at least, and just want to remind everybody, please, if you like the show, if you want to support the show, drop by iTunes if you haven't already, rate it, review it, share it with your friends, and if you feel so inclined, subscribe. Even if you don't use iTunes as your primary podcast provider, subscribing is a big boost to the show. So if you want to support the show, that would be a great way to do it, and I would definitely appreciate it. And with that, Patrick, are you ready to talk about Rocky?
I am so ready.
Excellent. Let's dive into the stats. So it was released on December 3rd of 1976, so we just celebrated its 40th anniversary.
Absolutely. It's fun.
It was directed by John G. Avildsen, who directed The Karate Kid Part 2, and The Karate Kid Part 3, as well as Lean on Me, and he also directed Rocky V and Inferno. Now, the screenplay was written by Sylvester Stallone, and the music was by Bill Conti, who also composed the scores for Rocky 2 through 3 and 5, and Rocky Balboa, and then Bad Boys, The Karate Kid films 1 through 3, Rookie of the Year, and also Inferno. So he's sort of attached to Avildsen as a director.
Yep, which I think is kind of normal when you have a director. You usually have a corresponding composer that sticks with him.
Right, and I don't know the Karate Kid scores particularly well, but I've never noticed him as a problem, and he definitely does a good job here with the Rocky films as well.
Mm-hmm. That's for sure. That's for sure. I love Bill Conti.
Me too. This movie stars Sylvester Stallone, Talia Shire, Burt Young, Burgess Meredith, Carl Weathers, and Tony Burton. So, Patrick, what was your first experience with this movie? What do you remember about the first time you watched it, if anything?
Well, I grew up as a child of the 80s. And so my actual first experience with this movie was not in its succession. It was actually Rocky 3. I remember going to see this movie that had Mr. T in it and Hulk Hogan and this guy named Rocky. I don't know who this was. And I was just enthralled with all the big music, Eye of the Tiger, and the big fight sequences and stuff like that. And I was like, that's a great movie. And my dad, who is a real influence on exposing me to things older than myself in terms of music and movies and whatnot, said, hey, so you haven't seen the original, right? I said, there's an original? He goes, yeah, that 3 next to Rocky means there's 2 other ones before it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. So I think it was I was maybe 12 or 13 when he popped it in. We had it on VHS and I started watching it and I was like, this is boring. This is where's Mr. T? When does he fight this guy Apollo or whatever the guy's name was? And I really didn't take a second look at it until college, when for some reason every spring TBS or TNT, one of the cable stations, during finals week happened to correspond with this Rocky marathon, one night or something, where they would show a Rocky movie every night of the week. And so I would study for my exams. Well, okay, let me back up. I would, technically I wouldn't study. I would sit around and eat French fries and, hopefully, pray that I would pass my exam. But in addition to that, I would watch one of the Rocky movies. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to give this a chance again. So my first actual real involvement with the movie was in college. And I remember watching it going, that's pretty good. I'm a little older. I understand it in context with the rest of the films. And then when Stallone released Rocky Balboa, it's technically the 6th movie, but I don't really consider Rocky V in that pantheon. I kind of throw that out.
Right.
We don't relate to, it's like that relative you don't really want to acknowledge.
Right. I know what you mean.
So I watched that in my late 20s and I remember going, man, this is a phenomenal film. It reminded me a lot of pieces of the first one and how it became sort of a bookend to the whole Rocky saga. And so I went and revisited Rocky again, and that experience, my 3rd experience with it, I just fell in love with it. And I said, I can see why this won some Oscars. I can see why it made an impact in the world of cinema. And then you start reading about the stuff behind it, how Stallone said, no, I want to be in this, you can have, he was selling the screenplay and he said, you can have the screenplay as long as I get to be in it. And just all the stuff that kind of went along with the whole character of Rocky and how it was sort of a personified version of Stallone himself. I got really enthralled with that. So over the years, as I've watched it and rewatched it with those kinds of things in mind, I have just fallen in love with that, the whole saga itself. I just love the Rocky franchise, but in particular the first one, and then being able to watch it again for this podcast, I've just pulled so much more out of it that just make me love it even more. So it's a wonderful film, one that I connect with on a number of levels, and yeah, it's just really good.
I love that you mentioned that maybe it wasn't your formative viewing, but one of your first experiences with this movie was with your father, because the Rocky franchise, to a lesser extent, maybe the Indiana Jones franchise, are movies that I equate with movies that I watched with my father as a child. Mm-hmm. And it's not that I watched them all the time with my dad. It was just sometimes it would be on in the living room while he was watching TV, and I'd walk in and, hey, I'll sit and watch this with my dad a little bit. And so even though this isn't like a staple between my dad and me, it's something that I sort of just equate and think back to, is watching that with my dad. And, you know, probably the Rocky movie that I've seen the most, at least growing up, was Rocky IV, just because fighting Russia and Drago and living in America and all that kind of stuff was really fun. But as I've matured in my taste for movies and my love for story and character and all that stuff, Rocky, and as you mentioned, Rocky Balboa, are really just those movies that I've locked into and taken so much away from, because they are very different from a lot of the other movies in the Rocky franchise. You know, I've owned the Rocky box set for years on DVD, and I don't really touch them all that often, because outside of 1 and Rocky Balboa, 1 and 6, they're the ones that really sort of echo sentiments that I feel sometimes. You know, Rocky's a character that you can really identify with in these movies particularly.
Yeah. I think you hit on something, that the first and last focus more on the character of Rocky himself, whereas I think the second, third, fourth, and even fifth to an extent, I mean, the second, third, and fourth really hit on who he's fighting.
Right.
You know, it really is about that final fight. I mean, every film ends with a bout of some kind, and 2, 3, and 4 tend to elevate that moment. And I think particularly with the first one, and we'll get into that, it really just focuses more on the character himself. And I love that Rocky Balboa brings closure to that, to his, you know, there's no stuff left in the basement, you know, for him, that he, you know, if I'm to quote Paul, you know, he finished the race, you know, he did that, and he has nothing else to do. And I think as a franchise, as an audience, we were left going, good, don't do anything else. Don't taint that, because that's the exclamation point for the Rocky character. And to segue a little bit to Creed, I think people might call that a cheat a little bit, but I don't think it's like Rocky 7. It's really about somebody else, and he takes a back seat to it. So I really think both the first and last are great bookends to an incredible franchise.
Creed is another movie that I just got on Blu-ray for Christmas, and I haven't yet watched it, so I'm really excited, especially with revisiting the first Rocky. I'm really excited to dive into Creed. But that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the story specifically of Rocky. What is it about the story that you sort of find yourself attached to?
Well, early on, I think I'll confess I'll probably be referring to the entire franchise a lot in this, because I think the same themes get echoed throughout. But this kind of, not really a hero's quest, but this kind of underdog Cinderella story that we see a lot is there, and that's kind of what attracted me to it at first. But more so, it's the elevation of a character that is not who he seems, and who even deceives himself. So you have this character of Rocky who calls himself a bum, calls himself a loser, calls himself an idiot, and he's compassionate. He's forward thinking. He's not dumb. I mean, he knows what he's good at, and he does it. And so I think it's interesting to see a character who berates himself to an, you know, even, but at the same time, who we see as this omniscient kind of audience of going, you're so much more. I mean, we become kind of the Adrian character as an audience. We go, you're more than who you think you are. And I think that resonates with me, is that there are times when I see myself on like a 2-foot perimeter. You know, I see myself kind of in this little 2-foot area, and I don't see myself from a 30,000 foot. I don't see myself in terms of how I impact the world and how I impact the people around me. I tend to kind of rest my successes and failures based on what I'm feeling in that moment. And I think that's kind of what resonates with me when I watch this movie. Is I think that's what Rocky battles with, is he thinks he's limited, but he's really not. He's got so much that he's already doing for other people.
Right. I mean, this is the underdog story. When somebody says, name an underdog, I'd be willing to bet 75 to 90% of people are going to say Rocky, just because this is a story about a man who never had a shot, who had passed his opportunities for a shot, and he's suddenly given a shot and makes it. You know, he goes the distance. That's what this movie is about. It's about going the distance and proving that no matter what people say about you, no matter what you think about you, none of that matters. It's just about going the distance and proving something to not only to others, but to yourself.
Yeah.
And I mean, we'll talk about that more in depth in a little bit, I'm sure. But this is the underdog story, and everybody loves an underdog.
Absolutely.
But it's also a great love story. I think, you think Rocky, you think punching people in the face, but watching this movie in particular, you see this wonderful love story develop between Adrian and Rocky. And they're both, there's talk in this movie about filling gaps. And these two characters really do fill the gaps for each other. And you see those gaps in themselves and the parts of their life that are lacking. And you see how these characters come together and form their relationship and build that relationship. And it really becomes something outstanding by the end of the film.
Oh gosh, yeah, and it makes the line at the end, yo Adrian, when he's yelling. I mean, it makes that so much more impactful because if we look at her progression, the character of Adrian on her own, progressing throughout the Rocky franchise, we see her get more assertive. We see her get more confident. And I love the moment in Rocky 3 where he's just lost that beach race with Apollo, and she goes, what's the truth, man? Dang it, or whatever. In that moment, I saw Adrian become like the strong. I saw her personify who she had been the previous two movies. And there are moments in this film where she does that. She does it in different ways. She does it with Paulie. She does it in her own way with Rocky. But I think you're exactly right. This love story comes from two people. I think there was a great line. I think when they were, well, first of all, Adrian's the only one who makes him smile. Like, I don't see him ever smile except when he's talking to her or talking about her. He cracks the most terrible jokes around her. Just walking. He goes into the pet store every morning and night and always tells a really bad joke. And, at one point they're on a date. They're on their date and they come home. They're walking to his house and he says, I'm dumb and you're shy. I mean, that makes us we make a really good couple. But there's some truth to that, because, you've got these two quirky people that it's a great line to fill in gaps, and they do that. And, it came out of left field. When you watch this, you don't expect that. You see the underdog story, you don't expect a love story to come out and to have that kind of an impact.
Yeah, they're two people who nobody ever paid any attention to. They find each other and they discover that someone can care about them. And that's what makes that love story in particular so endearing. Do you have any particular scenes real quick before we talk about characters a little bit more?
Man, there are a ton. I could talk all night about the things, but I love the opening sequence, and particularly, he's opens up with him fighting, but the moment that he's sitting in the locker room smoking a cigarette, which is hilarious, to the moment that he gets home, he doesn't say really anything. In fact, I think maybe he sings a little bit with his brother, with that little, the alley band or whatever.
Yeah, you guys get better every year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he takes a drink of the wine or whatever. But we learn so much about who he is without him actually saying anything. We see his apartment. We see, who he lives with. He has turtles and a fish. But there's, we see that he's alone. He's a loner. There's no fanfare. There's no manager. We don't see a manager telling him, great fight. It's just him sitting in a locker room by himself. We kind of recognize that fighting is just a job to him. It's like, it's what I do at night. I'm a bouncer, or not bouncer, but I'm a thumb breaker during the day. And he's not even really that.
No.
But I love the ending of that whole sequence where he finishes that whole night by just putting ice on his head. And you just see him kind of just go, another day.
Right.
But we get so much about him without any kind of dialogue, without any kind of monologue. And, that's hard to do. That's really tough to do as a director and as a writer, because you want to fill in that stuff with music or with dialogue or with something. The director, he trusts the audience to kind of, get those clues from all those different things.
Yeah, in those first couple moments of the movie, the first couple minutes, you really see that this story is something special because they show so much and don't tell you. And that's what you want in a film. You don't want to be told everything. You want the director and the writer to put some faith in you and realize, my audience isn't stupid. I'm not filling a crowd of idiots. These people are smart, they're informed, and they're going to be entertained, but they're also going to maybe learn something, or to maybe be analytical sometimes. Yes, this is a fighting movie, but this movie is about so much more than fighting.
Yeah. I think one of my other scenes that I love the most, or really, really enjoy, is the first run sequence, the first where he's accepted the bout, and the 4 a.m. again, nobody's saying anything with the exception of the radio. It's 4 a.m. You hear on the radio that it's 23 degrees outside. He's shivering. He goes and drinks like 6 raw eggs.
Right.
And then it's just him in the streets, running through the streets of Philadelphia early in the morning. Bill Conti's music is just kind of tinkering in the background, but there's no fanfare. Again, it's really just about him and about his journey, and it ends with him going up those iconic steps. They weren't iconic, at that point, but he's struggling. We see him getting those side stitches and him breathing heavy. And I just love that, because to me that says this is the underdog. This is what personifies the underdog, is someone who is he's just doing anything, only what he knows how to do, and he's doing it the best he can.
Right. And you also see there's maybe some truth to the fact that Mickey's always saying that he's just a bum and you only fight bums, because at this point, he had a fight 2 days ago, but he's struggling running up some stairs. He's not in the best shape of his life because he wasn't really having to be in the best shape of his life. And so this is finally giving him an opportunity to both to prove himself to others, but also to really challenge himself and to prove himself to himself.
That's for sure.
I wrote down just a couple quick scenes. The first one is one that you sort of alluded to earlier, where Adrian finally stands up to Polly and says, I take care of you. I cook, I clean, I do the laundry, and I don't owe you nothing. I am not a loser. And It's just like, wow, what a powerful scene, where this person who we've seen hiding behind glasses and a beanie at first, and then building that relationship with Rocky and growing comfortable in that relationship with Rocky, and still not being treated the best by her brother, and she finally gains the strength and the confidence to stand up to her brother and say, I am not this person that you have always told me I am. Mm-hmm. And that it's just such a powerful scene.
For sure, man. And this is where her relationship with Rocky just it shines, is she goes back to the room, and the first time that she runs back to the room was Thanksgiving. And she was timid, and she had her big hoodie, or her little toboggan on and everything. And I love that when he opens the door and she looks at him and she goes, "You want a roommate?" And he goes, "Absolutely." It says so much about their relationship and how much they trust each other and how much they care for each other and how much they lean on each other, because he needs her to build him up and to remind him that he's not a bum. And she needs him to tell her that she's not a loser, and that she's pretty, that she's not this thing that Polly says she is.
Definitely. And I just want to real quick also highlight the fight sequence. I mean, that's always a highlight of these Rocky movies. No matter the content of the rest of the movie, there's always a great fight at the end. And after I was watching some of the credits last night roll by, and I learned that Sylvester Stallone actually choreographed the boxing. I don't know if that stuck for all 5 or 7 movies now. He probably didn't do the Creed stuff or the Rocky Balboa stuff, but I'm just impressed, because I've never felt that the Rocky fight seemed inauthentic. There's just so much content in this one, because we walk into the fight and nobody's putting any faith in Rocky. Apollo treats it like a show, and he's showing off, and there's this moment where Rocky lands the first punch and Apollo's just floored, and everybody, the stadium explodes. It's wow. You get Rocky's sort of slow response and the strength in contrast to Apollo's speed. And there's moments where he's almost out, but he stands back up. The crowd is chanting his name at an event that was meant to promote Apollo. And he's still standing when the bell rings. He went the distance, and all he cares about when the fight is over is where Adrian is. And if that's not what this movie is about, then I don't know what is.
That's You're exactly right when it comes to the fight sequences. And I remember reading about the Rocky Balboa fight sequence. He wanted it to look as if it were in modern times. Like he wanted it to look like it was an HD pay-per-view match. And I thought that was great because he wanted to create some authenticity to it. And I don't know if he wanted that for this film or if he just wanted it to look very, theatrical and very intense. But I think for both of those, for both this one and Rocky Balboa, those fight sequences are probably my favorites because of the stakes.
Right.
Rocky IV being a great kind of nostalgic, like, yeah, beat the Russians,
America,
but America, but then you have these two again that are almost parallel. Rocky saying, "Can I do this?" He's questioning himself in both of these instances, and I think that the way in which they're choreographed, the way in which they're filmed, is appropriate for each one of them.
Definitely. Well, let's go ahead and move on to characters and talk just a little bit more about Rocky specifically. We've sort of said a lot about him, at least what I have written down. But what I like about Rocky, he's just a likable and he's a genuinely good guy. Mm-hmm. Despite what he does for a living, working for Gyatso, he doesn't want to break anybody's thumbs. He's just trying to make a living. And even if it means he gets in trouble with his boss, he doesn't want to injure anybody to get money. He helps little Marie, who we see again in Rocky Balboa. He helps little Marie by trying to give her advice.
Creepo!
Right. He tries to give her advice, and he's just a good guy, and it's hard to not sympathize with him.
Well, he's a redeemer. I think he's a redeemer character, not one who he's redeemed obviously because he went the distance, but I think he redeems other people. Like there's a great scene. It's just after Adrian has her just phenomenal yelling triumph with Paulie. I don't know how many days later, maybe it's a day or two later, but Rocky's in his last kind of, practice session or whatever, training session, and he's going over to take a shower, and Paulie comes up to him and he says, and of course, again, this is the scene right after this, like, blow up. He tells Paulie, or Paulie says, "Hey, can I make some money off your name?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" He's like, like advertising. He goes, "What do you know about advertising?" And then, and Paulie doesn't say anything. He goes, "If you can make money off my name, you do it." And then he goes, "Can you help me take my gloves off?" And I think for me, that was a moment where Rocky is saying, "You're my crazy brother, but I love you."
Right.
And even the scene before where he, right before he goes to Adrian and says, and she says, "You want a roommate?" He grabs Paulie, and he could have popped him. I mean, he could have just, done whatever. And he just holds him and he just looks at him and he calms him down. And to me, someone who's a fighter and the ability to control that, the ability to look at someone right in the eye and say, "Look, it's not worth it. We need to be bigger than this. We need to be better than this." That says a lot about his character and about how he's not only compassionate, but he's also thinking about the world around him and how he needs to be to the world. And Paulie's a great kind of antithesis to him.
Definitely.
That's what I like about Paulie the most, is that he's a great kind of opposite to who Rocky is.
Right. One scene that I really want to highlight for Rocky is at the very beginning of the film. It's actually part of that sequence that you were talking about earlier in the first couple of minutes, where there's not really a whole lot of dialogue. There's this shot, and it's fantastic cinematography, where he is staring at his mirror, and we slowly have a pan towards this photo of a little kid, and there's no cuts or bruises on his face. He's wearing this nice little plaid shirt. He's dressed smartly. And I mean, we assume, and we're correct, that's Rocky. And he's just standing there, and the camera's focused on him. We see his sort of blurred image in the reflection of the mirror, but he just stands and he stares at it, and he grabs the photo and he just looks at it. And then the camera continues panning forward, and it refocuses on Rocky. And we have this contrast of who Rocky used to be as a kid, this innocent kid. His life was probably a lot better than it was now because he was a kid. He had hope. He had the whole rest of his life ahead of him. And now here he is, 30 years old, fighting bums, getting disrespected by everybody, including his future brother-in-law. And he's just thinking to himself, you can see him thinking to himself, what has become of my life? Right before he just sort of stares in the mirror, he's sitting there practicing a joke for this girl who's paying him no attention at the time. And it's a really sort of sad moment, but it's just fantastic cinematography, storytelling,
Hmm.
because so much is communicated in that sequence of focusing on the picture, then refocusing on the mirror, and seeing that contrast between Kid Rocky and Rocky of today.
Yeah, it's a great scene. It's a great moment and says so much.
Yes, and to sort of wrap up at least my thoughts on Rocky himself, he's got a complete turnaround of his life once he's given the chance.
Hmm.
All he needed was a chance. All he needed was a shot, and all he wants to do is go the distance. In both this movie and in Rocky Balboa, it's all about him proving something. It's not
Hmm.
about a fight or trying to get a title. It's about saying, all I want to do is go the distance.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be just another bum from the neighborhood.
Hmm.
He wants to be so much more. He goes home from fights and he puts on smooth jazz. What? This is a person who doesn't really fit into the stereotype that you would think of a person like him on the surface. But
Yeah.
there's just so much good about Rocky, and I love that this kind of character is given the chance to blossom and to prove himself.
Yeah, his character is a slow burn throughout the series. And I think that's a good thing for him because it gives the directors, it gives the writers new stories to work with. Um, I would be interested to see if this ever became a television series exploring the character of Rocky and how he kind of explores it, and how we see his life kind of blossom in a long form storytelling as opposed to like feature films. But obviously we won't get that, and that's okay. I like what we have, but his character I think is surprisingly one that should be a slow burn. It doesn't need to be a stereotypical one, and that's what I like about his character is that it's not stereotypical of what we would expect from who he is.
Is there anything more specifically you want to say about Adrian?
Adrian is amazing. She she has Talia Shire's mannerisms. She plays a great awkward person.
Yes.
It's believable because she's what's believable to me is seeing her progression because we feel what she feels whenever, like, for instance, like the ice skating scene. She's asking honest questions. She's like, "Why do you want to fight?" Because I can't sing and dance. Oh, hey, and there's a scene that even today still bothers me, but I'm understanding of it, and it's the scene in their apartment when they make out and potentially do whatever. But I'm watching this, and even on the most recent viewing, I'm watching this and I'm going, dude, Rocky, I love you, man, but you're not being cool right now. I mean, he's putting his hand on the door and he's like, don't go. But I love what he says. He affirms her. He says, you can take off your hat because you're really pretty. And she goes, don't tease me. He goes, I'm not teasing you. And I think in that moment, what we see is her becoming more vulnerable with him. And I think for her, her progression as a character goes from being timid to strong, but it takes the path of vulnerability. Like she has to be vulnerable with him and he has to be vulnerable with her. And so both of their progressions as characters are on parallel paths. And I think that's why she's such a strong character to me because, she's his partner, but she's also his equal in some ways.
Definitely. And in that scene in particular, in the apartment, I think that it's in that moment, it's about her realizing that he is being genuine with her. Mm-hmm. And I would like to think that had she not been open to anything in that moment, that he would have let her go because Rocky is a good person. So for me, that I would understand why that scene would be bothersome, but I don't think he's pressuring her at all in a super negative way, at least.
It's a tender moment, and it's one that you have to trust Rocky as a character to know that he's not doing anything unintentionally. And the thing is that's set up early on. I mean, even the dock scene where he refuses the coat from the guy in payment for money. He goes, no, it's cold, and so he's showing that mercy and he lets him off the hook and he goes, I ain't emotionally involved. But I think when you have those callbacks, it helps me to understand that what he's doing is he's not just trying to get nookie or anything like that. He's trying to he cares deeply about this girl that he's seen every morning and every night at the pet store, and offers to walk her home, and tells her bad jokes, and so we get that early on. It's just, man, it's just
right. I know what you're saying.
I'm going, wait, come on now.
She's opening herself up to the first person who's paid her any attention.
Yeah. And to me, in today's world, that seems like, gosh, that's a no. Don't do that. That's stranger danger to me. So, but I completely get it and respect it and understand it.
Now, what about Apollo? We don't get a lot of him in this movie, but
no, we don't. But what we get is Muhammad Ali. We get an entertainer.
Right.
We get this. One of my favorite moments with him is when he finds out that the original fighter can't make it because he has a busted arm or something, or he's got an injury. And he goes, here's what you're going to do. We're going to give an unknown a title shot. And he goes to this whole spiel, and like he almost like he crafts this entire message off the top of his head of like, here's what we're going to, it's going to be like this. And we're going to do this and do that. I can't remember the dialogue particularly. And at the end, the promoter, whoever, says, I like it, Apollo. It's very American. And he goes, no, it's very smart. And what he's saying is, I'm very smart. And you couple that with a couple of scenes later when he finds Rocky's name in that encyclopedia boxing, whatever book. And he says, it's the name, man. It's the name. This country was founded by an Italian. Well, what better way to get it on with one of his descendants? And I don't know if he does this intentionally, but his trainer says, man, it's a southpaw. I don't want you fighting him. And he just kind of brushes off this, no, I'll beat him in 3. He just kind of says that like half-heartedly, I'll beat him in 3.
Right. He is big-headed and he's overconfident. Exactly.
He's concerned more about the image of the thing and not about the fight itself. And to me, that showed his Achilles heel was his own ego.
Mm-hmm.
And it paid itself off, later in the film, but he owned that role as an entertainer all the way up to the moment when we see him come out as George Washington and then his Uncle Sam. So even without saying a lot, we get a lot of character development from him.
Right. We never see Apollo training in this movie. We see Rocky breaking his butt to get in shape, to prove himself. And Apollo is just sitting by the wayside, having a drink, making plans, watching TV, all this stuff that is completely unrelated to preparing himself for a fight. Like a fight. Somebody is going to be punching you, and he's just sitting around not worried about it. And one of my favorite moments is the lead up to the fight as they're entering the ring, and you have the announcers at the side of the ring saying, "Oh, Rocky doesn't stand a chance." Blah blah blah. They are very concerned about Rocky's ability to stand a chance against Apollo. And then when he comes in, they don't say anything about how he looks, what kind of shape he's in. It's all about, oh, look at the great show he's putting on. What a great guy. And everybody is completely unconcerned with Rocky. I mean, he's nobody. Nobody's heard of him. His name is completely unknown to everybody. He isn't going to stand a chance. And then that's when that first punch that Rocky lands completely, literally floors Apollo. Mm-hmm. And it just is a big testament to Apollo. And even towards the end of the fight, he said, ain't going to be no rematch. He's all concerned about the image of the thing. He doesn't want to go toe-to-toe with this guy who's gone toe-to-toe with him far more than he expected.
Yeah. And I think one of the great lines after that was at the end of that first round where his manager or his trainer goes, he doesn't think this is a dang show. He thinks it's a dang fight. So let's finish him and get it over.
Right.
I mean, for the first time, we see that, Apollo's, entourage and his whole crew. I mean, they're scared. This is the real deal. And of course, that theme is kind of articulated again in Rocky 3, where Rocky's kind of lost his edge, and so he has to get it back, get that eye of the tiger. And I think that's kind of what, I think it feels a little recycled in Rocky 3 because that same kind of thing is going on with Apollo here. But it's still a strong theme. It's one that I think Apollo says, okay, I'm going to have to give my best. And I think that's what makes Rocky feel better about going the distance, is that in Rocky 2, he asks Apollo in the hospital, he says, did you give me your best? And he says, yeah, I did. I mean, I think that's what validated Rocky's thing, is that Apollo didn't hold back. And we see that in this fight sequence.
Definitely. Now, are there any other characters you want to talk more in depth about?
No, I mean, I think Paul is the only other one that I think is kind of a standout for me. Again, I think, but I've already said, he is Rocky's sort of opposite. But at the same time, I think he can be such a guru at times. You know,
Yeah.
he gets. I confess this. You know, I'm going to Rocky Balboa. I love the scene in that movie where he basically calls Rocky out and says, "Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to do this?" And he gets Rocky to confess on, why he wants to do this about the stuff in the basement. And I love that Paulie is as goofy as he is, as selfish as he is. He's loyal. He's like that loyal pet for Rocky, that loyal dog that, he's he's not going to leave Rocky's side. And I love that about him.
Yeah, I think most of Paulie's growth as a character comes in the later films, but you're right. In this movie, he does show his loyalty, despite the fights that they have, despite his drunkenness, despite just generally, honestly, not being a good person. Paulie stays by Adrian's side, stays by Rocky's side, and always comes back knowing that the people, they love him and that they're going to continue to support him the best that they can, and he's going to reciprocate because he is loyal. I didn't really have a whole lot to say about Paulie outside of that, but because he's not a great person here, he really just helps to build Adrian and Rocky up a little bit more and to allow them to go on their journeys in this movie, and he gets to go on his later.
He's got probably some of the best lines too, like his lungs you punch out, and these half drunk lines that he says here and there.
You punch him that hard, we're going to be charged for murder.
You put him away for murder. It's so great.
And it should be said that Burgess Meredith as Mickey is also great. I mean,
yes.
there's not a whole lot for him to grow here either. You sort of see his hubris. He comes down from his pride, and we see that he has what he has seen in Rocky and why he has sort of ignored him over these years, because he has talent and he sort of squandered it. And on the other side of the coin, Rocky has asked for help and hasn't received it. And so we sort of see Mickey, okay, I realize what I've done. And he just walks out after Rocky has sort of turned him down. And Rocky has his sort of yelling match with the back of the door. But after that, they set aside their disagreements or whatever, and they come together and they make a great partnership.
Yeah. I think that you mentioned at the beginning about this movie being sort of a father-son experience for you. And I think that Mick is that father figure for Rocky in a lot of ways. He says, you have heart, but you fight like an ape. And then he's, that scene in the apartment is so wonderful, because he tries to beat around the bush. And then by the end of that scene, before Rocky goes on his little rant, he says, I want to be a manager. I want to be you need a manager. I want to do this for you. And, at first you're thinking Mickey just wants in on the action. He wants to be famous. And there might be some of that to that. I mean, for sure, because, for the previous 4 or 5 minutes, he's talked about his prime and how he doesn't have that anymore. But I'd also like to believe that he genuinely wants Rocky to gain this knowledge that he has and to pour himself in. I think he really wants to leave a legacy with someone, and Rocky's the way to do that. Whether that's selfish or not, I think is, up for debate. But I think at the end of the day, he does genuinely care about Rocky. And I think he's, when he berates him, when he says, you had, he says, I want to know why you've been sticking it to me for 8 years. And he goes, because, you had the potential to do everything, all this stuff, but you decided to be a cheap thumb breaker. And that's a dad to me. That's a dad response of him saying, you could have been something wonderful and you wasted it on the cheap. And I think that's what made that moment with him in the apartment and that resolution so much more enjoyable, is that they both began to understand each other and where they were coming from.
Right. Rocky hints toward this sort of at least decade-long relationship that these two characters have had. He says, "Where were you 10 years ago, Mickey?" So there's definitely some truth to that father-son sort of interaction, because, I mean, where's Rocky's parents in this movie? We don't see anything from them. We don't hear anything from them in this whole franchise that I remember. I don't think we see anything from Rocky's parents. And so in these first couple of films, while we have Mickey, he is very much a father figure. And so when Rocky yells at the back of the door after Mickey has left, after he's sort of turned him away because you weren't there then, why are you here now when I have this shot? And it's very much I've been sent to my room and I'm angry at my parents, but in the end I still love them and I'm going to seek their advice. And that's what he does. And so I think that's a really good point to be made, that it's very much a father-son relationship. Somebody with wisdom imparting that knowledge onto somebody who doesn't necessarily have it.
Yep, for sure.
Let's go ahead and move on and talk about the music just a little bit. What do you have to say about Bill Conti's score for this movie?
How much time do you have, Chad? Because this to me was the thing that made Rocky for me. And I'm not even talking about the main theme. Because when we think about Rocky, we think dun 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 dun, and that's what the movie starts with. We see the scrolling letters, and Bill Conti, he uses this theme, this piano driven horn, French horn driven theme, these light, just kind of somber tones or whatever you want to call it, in certain moments that call attention to, I think, what is a big theme in this movie, and that's the theme of vulnerability. The first time we hear music that's not that is the moment when he is Rocky's left. What's his boss's name?
Gatso.
Gosh, Gatso. Thank you. Gatso's he berates him basically. He says, "Do what I tell you. You make me look bad." And he's and Gatso leaves him and he walks away. And we hear that first instance of that dun dun dun. There's just real. And then every time we hear something like that, what I noticed was that it's a point where Rocky's either being left alone or where he is pondering something incredibly emotional or incredibly vulnerable about himself. It's just like the Thanksgiving moment there, or it's just after, what is it? I think it's just after he sees himself on TV and he's like, Polly's like, doesn't that bother you? He says, no, it doesn't bother me. And he's leaving and he tells Adrian, you remember how I said that stuff didn't bother me? Well, it does. And it's, again, the music comes in. And I just think that Bill Conti, he works those moments in to kind of show us this is a moment for Rocky to be incredibly vulnerable with himself, with Adrian, with Mick. That scene after he yells at the door, that same theme comes in as he's shaking Mick's hand, and we don't even hear what they're saying, but we see this resolution happen. And I think that Bill Conti does that intentionally, and I love that. And I love that he doesn't bring in that fanfare until it's necessary, until it's that big, confident running and confident training montage or whatever near the end of the film. But I just think his music isn't overbearing at all. It's used sparingly, and it's used to tell the big story. And I love that.
Right. I think the music here is definitely a reflection of Rocky, the character, because we get more of the tender than the loud or the bombastic or the forceful. I mean, everybody remembers Gonna Fly Now, and that is the prominent music we hear here, but the way it's presented more often than not is, as you said, the sort of tender piano. It isolates that sort of main instrumental theme from Gonna Fly Now, but plays it one note at a time on a piano, and it's just so much more touching. And it's about the journey. It's about Rocky sort of slowly convincing himself, this is something I can do. This is something I can do. And it's not until he has fully gained that confidence and fully gone the distance that we hear the full Gonna Fly Now big theme and like the strong training montage. There's an earlier training montage where he goes on that run that we were talking about. It's a track called Philadelphia Morning, and it starts with like a French horn solo, and it's really somber and so not lazy, but it's really sort of intentional without being energetic. It's
paced is what it
is.
It's just
exactly.
It's very, and because it makes you focus on him and the I felt cold with him. Like I felt freezing cold. I felt like it was 23 degrees when he was shivering in the bed, and as he was running through the empty streets of Philadelphia, you felt isolated with him. And I think that's what the pulled back theme does, is it brings this sense of isolation that Rocky carries with him. Even when he's with Adrian, like those points of vulnerability, I mean, he's still dealing with it himself. Thank goodness he has Adrian to rely on, but he's still the one that goes to the the arena the night before and looks around, it's still just him. And I think the music really accents that sense of isolation with him.
Right. The big parts that everybody's familiar with come from those moments when he's at his best. And those moments when he's not at his best, or when he's not feeling like this extreme energy or elation even, we get that tenderness. And that's who Rocky is. He's a tender character. And not just because he's being pulverized all the time.
And until the big fight, his nose had never been broken. So he's
exactly
he's still tender up there until that first round.
Yeah, Going the Distance has always been my favorite track of the score. It's like the turning point of the fight. It's when everybody realizes that, wow, this Rocky guy, he stands a chance. And that's when that track kicks in. It's the ba 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 bum 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 ba 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 bum. It's so good.
It really is. And I think even equally as much as that is the very end.
Oh yes, the final bell. I believe that track is called.
I love that because it sings elation. Like you're almost like going, like you're just breathing out with Rocky. Like, oh my gosh, my nose is busted too. My eye is cut, and I can't do this. And I just want Adrian too. It's just like I feel that elation with him because of that music.
Definitely. And let's go ahead and use that sort of as a transition into the relevant section, because the ultimate takeaway for me from this movie, it's all about the journey rather than the destination. If you ask, I think, just random people in the street who won the fight in Rocky 1, most people are going to say Rocky, but that's not the case, because it's not important whether he wins or loses here. What's important is that he stands a chance. He's still standing when the bell rings. And when the bell has rung and the fight is over, he doesn't care. He doesn't care what the judges have to say. He doesn't care who they say won. He cares where his girlfriend is, and they say, "I love you" for the first time. And that's it. That's what the movie's about. It's about the process of getting to that point. And I would say because of that reason, this movie is ultimately more of a love story than anything else.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think that the love story is a huge, huge part of it. I think for me, it's probably along with that, in that same vein, the idea that a person becomes stronger when he opens up to someone else. And I think for Rocky, he did that on multiple levels. I think he opened up, obviously, to Adrian and became more vulnerable with her and her to him. I think there was the moments with Mickey where he opened up and became more vulnerable with him and Mickey to him as well. But also I think that Rocky, when he said, when Apollo says, ain't going to be no rematch, and he said, don't want one, I think in that moment, I think he became very real with himself and said, just like you said, I did it. I'm finished. It's done. I don't have anything else to prove. And to me, I think that's what could have just ended this whole franchise, and I've been completely fine with it. I like what I got with 2, 3, 4 and Balboa, but I think that the true journey that he was on was made complete in this movie. It was probably echoed otherwise, but I think that all of that exploration and all the vulnerability that he had and the way in which he became stronger because of the people that he was around and because of his ability to open up to other people and believe in himself and see himself from 30,000 feet, I think that's what made this story a complete one. It didn't need to be continued. It was fine that it did, but it's a great standalone feature film because it tells that story completely.
I completely agree. And, I think another great message from this movie is the idea of standing up for both yourself and for others when you or they are told that you can't do something. Everybody could be somebody, and you are what you act like. If you act like a winner, you're going to be a winner. If you act like a bum, you're going to be a bum. And Rocky warns Maria of acting like something else. And it's all over this movie. Basically, sort of dress for the job you want rather than the job you have, I guess. That's sort of a semi-applicable saying here. I think that sort of fits in with that. Just standing up for yourself and for others. And no matter what, put some confidence in yourself and stand up for yourself, even if nobody else will.
Yeah. I think if I had to take away one thing, it would be, in the immortal words of Apollo, be a thinker. not a stinker.
Yeah, and speaking of Apollo, I think there's definitely some dangers of cockiness in this movie.
For sure. And also dressing too patriotic. I think there's a limit that you can be too patriotic.
Yeah, definitely. And that's echoed in Rocky IV. Spoilers, I guess.
Seriously.
Any other takeaways, Patrick?
Man, it's just a great film. I enjoyed rewatching it, and I just think we talk on Feeling Film about every once in a while about the rewatchability factor of a movie and how it increases value. And Rocky is one of those movies that, as a standalone, it's just great to watch on a yearly basis. I typically, just because out of habit, I'll watch it in the spring, around finals week, because that's when I first got exposed to like really appreciating it. But I was glad to be able to break my tradition a little bit and watch it for this show.
Yeah, and this was actually my first time watching Rocky in a few years. I would say it's been a while, and I've watched it twice in the past month, and I mean, I loved it both times. I don't think I could get tired of it. I think I could continue watching this. And with the big fight between Rocky and Apollo taking place on New Year's Day, I thought, I mean, what better a time than to release this episode the week of the turn of the new year?
That's exactly right, man. It's a perfect timing.
Yeah, and I mean, it's an ultimate feel-good film.
It really is.
I don't think I could walk away from this movie feeling sad. You walk away from this film pumping your fist in the air, pumped for Rocky, pumped for Adrian, because they did it. And I think that's a great thing.
I agree. And I think, I'll just say this. I think one thing that stands out to me is I think that every scene, I remember at least most of the scenes early on seemed to have like one line that was just hilariously just funny. Just some kind of, I don't know what it was, but like, like first scene with Adrian, how's the turtle food this week? And then, I ain't emotionally involved, and just all these different like lines by either Rocky or Polly or whatever. It's just good dialogue, and I think it breaks up some of the tension of what this movie could potentially have turned into as like a long drama with no funny at all. And I think it had some great little comedic moments.
Yeah, you definitely sense a lot of Stallone in the script, and I think it makes it for the better. What better? I think it's awesome that the guy who wrote the script got to play the character, and that really benefits the film, I think, because he knows Rocky.
He does. I mean, he is, and I think I don't know if I remember reading about this or seeing it, that this is the evolution of Sylvester Stallone. And I think he sort of kind of backtracked a little bit with the Expendables, but I think at one point he said that Rocky and Rambo were going to be his final movies. I think maybe he meant that they were going to, in there, Rocky Balboa and the last Rambo were going to be the final in that franchise. But I think both, I don't know much about Rambo, but I know, it seems like Rocky is basically the evolution of the actor in character form.
Yeah, I don't know if I would ever care for another Stallone character like I do about Rocky, but I'm glad he exists. I'm glad we have multiple movies, and that ultimately we have sort of ended on a high note in Rocky's story at this point in time.
Yep.
Anything else?
Nope. I think I could say a lot more, but we don't have 5 hours, so I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, with that is the end of the official 22nd episode of Cinescope. Thank you so much for being patient with me, Patrick, and making this work. It is now 12:27 a.m. where I'm living, and I think you're in the same time zone. So we've pulled a late night, but I think it was worth it.
Absolutely, man. I'm so glad that we were able to connect and talk about this film and get it going in time for the new year.
Definitely. Now, contact for the show. You can find it on facebook.com/Cinescope Podcast and @Cinescope Pod on Twitter. Again, real quick, go to iTunes, rate, review, subscribe. It's a big help. And remember, there's also the email address, thecinescopepodcast@gmail.com. So if you have any feedback or ideas, or if you're interested in co-hosting, if you have a movie that you love and think you could talk about it for a little while, let me know. Patrick, what about you? Where can we find you online?
Well, usually you can find me at Shoeless Patch on Twitter, ShoelessPatch. I'm also at facebook.com/shoelesspatch, or you can find me at my website, thisispatch.com. As I mentioned before, I co-host the Feelin' Film Podcast, and you can find out more about us at feelinfilm.com.
And if you like Cinescope, if you like our approach to movies, you will definitely like Feelin' Film. And they cover more recent releases and some older releases. But since we don't cover the recent releases here on Cinescope, they're a great resource to sort of look at films from a more positive light as they come out. Now, the best place to find me is on Twitter at Chadadada. That is CHADADADA, and on Facebook.com/Chad.Hopkins. And a reminder, all of the show notes, all the contact information can be found at the website at thecinescopepodcast.com. And also at the website, you'll find all of our past episodes, including our 2 Christmas episodes, which I was really happy with and really proud of. And the last one, episode 21, which was a movie commentary for my favorite Christmas movie and a movie that I know, Patrick, you care a lot about, The Polar Express.
Yes.
I would love, while it's still sort of in season, everybody, if you went back one episode and checked out that commentary, pop in the movie. I give instructions on how to sync it up in the podcast episode. It's my first time doing a commentary, and if you could listen, if you could give me some feedback, whether you like it, whether you don't like it, that's okay. I put a lot of effort into it, and I would just love to hear what everybody thinks. So that's all for this week. Thank you once again, Patrick, for coming on the show and talking this movie with you. It's been awesome talking with you about Rocky.
I've enjoyed it, man. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 22. I'm Chad Hopkins. This was Cinescope, and we'll be back next week with episode 23. Have fun and celebrate movies.